Alberta Primetime with Michael Higgins.
Welcome to Alberta Primetime. Ahead tonight, we'll find out how the Alberta-Ottawa MOU is being received in the Fort McMurray region. But first, the Smith government uses the Notwithstanding clause for a fourth time. And our politics panel is here to help kick off the program. Joining us this evening, Brendan Boyd, an associate professor of political science at MacEwan University, and John Santos, political analyst. Good evening to you both. And let's begin with the Smith government again using the Notwithstanding clause, this time to pass a controversial bill containing 3 laws affecting transgender citizens.
Because the entire justification for this action is one anecdote of one high school student in Alberta who didn't qualify in a race allegedly because of a trans athlete. That's it. One anecdote.
This is a UCP government that's going to have big regrets about the decisions they made this past session.
Opposition condemnation of Bill 9 and use of the Notwithstanding clause to protect it from legal challenges for each of 3 laws affecting transgender youth, including a policing of names and pronouns in schools, banning transgender girls from participating in amateur female sports, and restricting gender-affirming health care for youth under 16. The bill passed at 2:20 in the morning. Brendan, to be invoked 4 times in less than 2 months by the same government, do you think that was ever envisioned when the Notwithstanding clause initially came to be?
Well, it's hard to say. These things do obviously tend to move over time. One of the things I think, though, is that, to kind of pull back is that, we live in a liberal democracy, and we really are focusing a lot on the democracy part, in the sense that, Danielle Smith is saying, we don't need judges being gatekeepers, that type of thing. But we're forgetting about the liberal part of liberal democracy, which involves the rule of law and the protection of and equality of rights. And so, I think the way it's being used now, there are some legitimate concerns that this is moving, taking the issue out of the hands of unelected officials that are there to be independent from government and be able to make the right decision, whether it's the popular one.
John, what's your read on the path the Smith government may be paving here? Could there be a longer-term motivation at play?
Yeah, several commentators have looked at their pattern of using the Notwithstanding clause and theorize that there's a long play here to normalize its use, so that anytime, not just to sort of implement its domestic policy agenda with regards to some of these contentious social issues, but if the provincial government just wanted to sort of ignore laws passed by the federal government that fall under the purview of Section 33 of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, so the Notwithstanding clause, that they could continue to do so, and people would sort of just collectively shrug because it had become normalized. And so a lot of folks do think that that's the long play, and certainly the amount of times that the Smith government has used this suggests that is a possibility. But even if you sort of ignore the long play, the fact that they have this very expansive, ambitious legislative agenda, using the Notwithstanding clause to sort of short circuit, this dialogue that happens between legislatures and courts with regards to constitutional issues, it's quite an effective tool for them to continue their shock and awe, or flood the zone strategy of having so many policy announcements that the opposition, the media, citizens can't really keep up with what they're doing.
Brendan, maybe just to pick up on that point, what kind of punctuation then does this put on the type of session it's been?
Yeah, I guess maybe one of the themes coming out of this session is the idea that, procedures around the legislature are kind of being used to achieve whatever needs to be achieved. And it's certainly not the first time we've seen that. You can go back to lots of different debates about this. But yeah, I think more and more those sort of rules that are in place to ensure debate and proper process around legislation are being used in a way to make sure that the government gets what they want through, limit debate, those types of things. And the reason is partly because this isn't something that typically voters have punished governments for doing. And I think governments are finding out that more and more, an argument that a government is playing with the institutions of democracy or circumventing them, I don't think is really a political winner. And so maybe that's part of the calculation that, hey, if we want to do this here, we want to limit debate or we want to move something through fast, why don't we do it? Because it's likely not going to hurt us the next time we go to an election.
All right. Well, now also in this final week of the fall sitting, Brendan just touched on it there a moment ago, the opposition accusing the government of changing the rules as it sees fit after it shut down the legislature Monday afternoon. It came after the UCP proposed moving up debate over two of its bills requiring unanimous consent, which the NDP refused to provide.
You can't have it both ways. You either have to choose one or the other. You can't argue that there isn't enough time to argue in this legislature and at the same time decline the opportunity to have more robust debate on those bills.
That sounds to me like the rhetoric of bullies that say, we're going to take away your time to talk about what you want to talk about, but we're going to blame you because you didn't want to talk about our government business. The
decision meant NDP and independent MLAs couldn't ask questions of the government or make or advance any motions ahead of the legislative break. John, what do you see the government accomplishing here?
Well, it's to expedite the passing of their bills. And, to go back to Brendan's point about, circumventing the rules around procedure, like it's a very technical subject. It's difficult for the average citizen to wrap their heads around, but it's a really important thing. If you think about a sports game, nobody wants to debate the rules, but rules are very important, and whether you enforce the rules can give one team an unfair advantage over the other, right? And there's, even if you don't violate the rules, sort of maneuvering sort of within the context of the rules in an unfair way, is also unsportsmanlike. And so, that's what this government is or has been accused by its critics of doing is using the advantage that the government does have in terms of setting the agenda and pushing things through. And I don't want to, it's important to note why some of these actions are notable. It's not because governments using time allocation closure on a bill is rare. Like, that happens all the time. But to sort of limit it to the extent that the UCP government has in this fall setting, that is extremely rare. And to couple that with the notwithstanding clause is unprecedented, right? And so it's important to sort of note why it's so notable what we're seeing in this fall legislative session.
And Brendan, what's to be made of Christina Gray's bullying analogy? How worrying a development should any of this be from the standpoint of the opposition?
Well, I think for the standpoint of the opposition, it certainly can be worrying for, from a good governance perspective, just like a lot of people might be concerned about that. But the other thing is for them is that it's always difficult for the opposition to get face time, to get headlines, get that what we would call earned media compared to the government. And so these things take, the amount of time that the opposition has to make their case, to speak to voters, and it limits that. And so we all know that, Naheed Nenshi and the NDP they're starting sort of anew with the new leader, introducing him to the public. And so, yeah, this is, I think, one way that the opposition might be concerned that they're just not getting enough face time as part of this because they don't get to have the clips, be it standing up in the session and speaking to these issues. And I would just note that, another issue here is that these are particularly controversial issues, and having debate on them when they're not something that there's a wide consensus on, I think is part of the reason that people are a little bit upset as well.
All right, time for us to take a quick break. But when we come back, pipeline pressure on the floor of the House of Commons. More from our politics panel in a moment. Welcome back. A Conservative motion to test support for a pipeline from Alberta to the Northwest BC coast drew a lot of attention to the House of Commons Tuesday evening.
Not only do we acknowledge the obligation to consult with our First Peoples, we put that right in the motion.
It's right there, Mark. The non-binding Conservative motion, which directly quoted from some of the Alberta-Ottawa pipeline MOU, was soundly defeated by the minority Liberal government with support from other opposition parties. Brendan, a whole lot of drama in the House of Commons, played up by both sides of the aisle. So to what degree was this purely political theatre?
Well, it certainly has some of the sort of characteristics of what we would call a wedge issue, right? And so the political concern here, at least for the Liberal government, is that now they're being forced to publicly put a statement on for their whole caucus and all the members of the party about whether they support or not, a pipeline. And obviously, the government's going to say that, well, this is not, the motion doesn't reflect the MOU that we signed, that type of thing. But we know that there are people in that Liberal caucus at the federal level who are uncomfortable with this. There may be Trudeau-era candidates, but we've seen some people, step down from cabinet, and we've seen other people sort of indicate they're a little bit uncomfortable. And so, there is definitely a political component to this, where they're trying to say, let's lean into this, because this is a place where the Liberals are a little bit undecided, and there's some tension there.
John, what do you see this motion ultimately accomplishing? How much division do you think it ended up exposing on the government side over support for an Alberta pipeline?
I don't think it'll accomplish anything. I don't think it has accomplished anything. And because the Liberals voted as a bloc, there hasn't been any outward division showed, at least in the immediate aftermath of the vote. Now, I mean, the federal Conservatives are going to use this as part of their messaging and their advertisements. They're certainly going to use it to target the two Alberta MPs who are members of the Liberal caucus. But in terms of like the broader strategic picture, I mean, this doesn't change anything substantive in the grand bargain that Danielle Smith and Mark Carney and their respective governments negotiated. It's not only did not contain everything in the MOU, but it was missing a crucial component of the grand bargain, which is the industrial carbon tax. And so, that element is one of the things that has kept internal opposition within Liberal ranks in check. And that's why the Liberals decided to vote against it. And so, as a ploy to increase the fractures within the Liberal caucus, I don't think it's worked yet. Could it work from a messaging standpoint to target those two Liberal ridings in Alberta? Yeah, probably it will be pretty effective in those campaigns in the future.
Brendan, by all appearances, Premier Smith remains committed to the cause. So could this create divisions of another sort on the Conservative side of the aisle, divisions between the federal Conservatives and Alberta Conservatives?
Yeah, and that's where this gets a little bit interesting in terms of the reversal, where you've also seen the Liberal government try to say, well, now you're trying to take issue with the negotiations or the MOU that Smith negotiated. I don't know. I don't know, obviously, the exact relationship between the provincial and federal parties on this one, but I would imagine that Smith would probably just keep her head down and kind of not weigh in on this at this point. So I don't see it having a huge impact, to be honest, just like it might not have much of an impact. The Liberals seem to avoid some of that division. I think the Conservatives might be able to avoid some of that provincial federal decisions because, we may move on pretty quickly to something else.
John, last 30 seconds or so to you. How much does this Conservative motion shore up support for Pierre Poilievre heading into the leadership review in Calgary?
Not very much. I mean, I think the people who are going to get riled up over this would have been backing him anyway, and so this doesn't inject any new information. And the important thing to remember is that motions aren't really that important in Parliament, right? It's bills that actually get things done, and so yeah, this was a political maneuver to try and expose divisions and drum up some new talking points for the Conservatives, and it sort of had mixed effectiveness in those things, I think.
All right, gentlemen, we're out of time. Have to leave it there. Great to see you both. Thank you kindly.
Great to be here.